Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the City Council of San Bruno Special Meeting Study Session of July 19, 2013. Call to order, please. Carol, roll call.
Councilmember Salazar.
Here.
Vice Mayor O'Connell.
Here.
Mayor Ruane.
Here.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Rivera.
Here. Item number 3 is conduct of business. If there's no objections, I would like to move item 3 to right after item number 4, which is public comment on items not on the agenda. There's some individuals here that would like to speak on other items, and they have a time restraint. So if there's no objection, okay. So let's go right to item number 4, which is public comment on items not on the agenda. It is the council's policy to refer matters raised in this forum to staff for investigation and or action where appropriate. The Brown Act prohibits the council from discussing or acting upon any matter not agendized pursuant to state law. If you could state your name and street, please.
Thank you, Mayor Ruane, for moving it up. I have 2 very brief items before we say the Pledge of Allegiance. First is, I want to thank the City Council for all the work you have put in to the grade separations. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I don't get up here very often. I remember you, Jim, and you, Ken, walking down the rails, and it was not this century, it was another century ago. And I want to thank you both for having been there every tie of the way.
You should remind them it was the end of the last century.
And I'd also like to thank our city manager and Clara Fabry for having picked up the flag from their predecessors. You know, we're never going to have another car hit that train and kill anybody in San Bruno. So thank you, thank you, thank you. The other thing I have, I went on vacation to Washington, and I visited the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum out at Chantilly, Virginia. That's the big hangar with the Discover shuttle and the Concorde, etc. And they have a jet that came from an aircraft carrier with the tail hook and all. But I could not find a docent in the building who could tell me where the first plane to land on a ship took off from. I know that. they have their little tablets, you know, to check this out, and they could not find it. And I think it would be appropriate for the city of San Bruno to get in touch with Jackie Spear, and let's see if we can't get San Bruno and Tanforan mentioned. That happened only once, and it happened, the guy took off from Tanforan in his Cutlass, land on the boat out there, and it's a magnificent story, and nobody else can tell it except San Bruno. I'd like to see us take some action on that, see if we can't get a little mention up there. San Bruno, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else like to speak on their public comment not on the agenda? All right. We're going to move right to number 3, which is conduct of business. And just before we do that, I want to offer a little explanation in the way of a slight apology. The last time we had the meeting here, we were up against a city council meeting. It was actually 10 after 7. We started it late. So the public did not get a chance to comment on the things that we talked about that evening. Tonight you will have plenty of time to comment on anything you'd like to regarding these bylaws. So I just want to let you know that it was not so much an oversight, but we really pushed against the time. So sorry you couldn't do it before, but you'll have plenty of time tonight to do it. Okay? Alice mentioned the pledge, and the pledge is not on tonight's agenda. So we won't be having the pledge this evening. Wow. You should. The item number 3, conduct of business, discuss the proposed bylaws for the San Bruno Community Foundation and provide direction for preparation of the bylaws. I'd like to give it over to City Attorney Mark Zaffarano to give us an overview as to where we've been, where we are, and hopefully where he hopes to get us tonight.
Well, good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, members of the public, and for anybody who might be watching at home. Tonight is a further discussion of the bylaws for the San Bruno Community Foundation. This is actually our 3rd study session about the bylaws specifically. there were 2 prior study sessions to discuss the overall formation of the nonprofit that was called for by the settlement agreement between the city and PG&E. Now, that might seem like a lot of meetings, and it is, but there are 2 things that have become clear throughout this process, and one of them is this is a unique situation with not many directly applicable models. And the second thing is there's not one right way to do it. So your staff and we in particular are committed to getting it right because it's important to the community to get it right, and we are going to get it right. Speaking about the community, you've already indicated there will be public input after my brief staff report and council discussion tonight, so we're very much looking forward to hearing what everybody has to say. We're also not asking for any final decisions tonight, just an opportunity for more discussion and direction, and we're intending to then bring those bylaws back at a subsequent city council meeting. And I'd also like to reintroduce a couple of other people that we have here at the table in case you hadn't met them before. We have sitting to my right, Britt Strotman. She's an attorney at the Myers-Nave Law Firm, our outside counsel, who has done a great many wonderful things for the city, including helped us with the drafting and consideration of the bylaws. And then we have Mary Ellen Loyens from the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. She has been equally valuable to the city in providing her expertise about nonprofits, something that the city doesn't know a lot about, and we're learning a great deal from her and hope to be able to learn even more from her this evening. Let me just make a couple of brief comments about what you have in front of you tonight, and then we'll turn it back to you. You have in front of you, and there is available here in the back in case you haven't received them, a set of draft bylaws which were revised from the last meeting. And there's really sort of 2 interrelated issues that we'd like to focus on tonight. The first one is the overall composition of the board, not who individually will be on the board, but sort of what's the board makeup going to look like. And then second of all, the related issue to that is the powers that are going to be or could be reserved to the city council, all of you, after the board is formed and after appointments have been made. So just to start with the first one, the composition of the board, just to make it clear for everybody, there is no legal reason why all 5 council members, for example, couldn't sit on the board of directors. There is no legal requirement, conversely, that anybody that's on the city council sit on the board of directors. That is entirely within your discretion. As the bylaws are currently written, and as we discussed last time, based on the last meeting, we have it set up so that there are 2 council members out of the 5 of you on the board, with the council appointing the remaining individuals. And you might remember the discussion at the time was a bit of a compromise with a minimum of 5 total and a maximum of 11 total. So if you had 2 city council members on the board, you would end up appointing anywhere between 3 and 9 board members during your process. So I just want to briefly explain what were some of the reasons why we recommended those things, and there were just a couple. First of all, we heard from Mary Ellen, based on her experience, that 5 is probably too few members for a board given their anticipated committee assignments and the range of workload that the board would be expected to perform. And we can hear a little bit more about that tonight. But that was one of the reasons why I think the council had decided on a range to give themselves some flexibility to determine how many board members do we need based on the workload. The second thing we heard was that it was desirable to have some professional expertise on the board beyond the experience and expertise that council members bring, especially financial, legal, philanthropic, and audit on the board. Another reason why we ended up with what we did in the draft bylaws is that 2 council members tends to minimize entanglements regarding the Brown Act and conflicts of interest. When you have a majority of council members on the board, it just makes it a little bit more complicated, not impossibly so, but there are some other considerations that we have to think about. And then finally, for a community foundation with this level of resources, the advice we received was it would be important to obtain additional direct community representation on the board. So that's why the staff's recommendation is in front of you, and based on what you told us last time was in the bylaws. So that's the composition of the board. The next topic, and the interrelated one, is what powers, if any, should the city council reserve to itself? And just to recap, what that means is that the board of directors is ultimately responsible for making the decisions of the corporation. But, under state law, the forming authority, that's you, can reserve some powers to approve certain major activities of the board. So, for example, we have a list of reserved powers at the back of the bylaws that you'll see that in essence says the city council gets to approve most of the major decisions of the board. Well, why did we recommend that? Well, there's no legal requirement that there be any reserved powers, nor is there any legal requirement to have any particular reserved powers. So again, these are all within your discretion. But what were what was the thinking behind putting those particular ones in there? Well, first of all, and most importantly, there's a recognition that the settlement it was negotiated by the city at the direction of the city council for damages that the city suffered as a whole. So we felt it was important to recommend that the city retain a significant number of powers that is somewhat broader than powers retained by most other nonprofits. So that's one reason why that was in there. A second reason is to preserve the accountability of the board to the city council for all of its major decisions. The third reason is to create a mechanism that would encourage the board and the city council to cooperate and work together on these major things. The board, knowing that the city council is going to have to approve, is going to have an interest and an incentive to make sure that those things get approved and not that they get rejected. And then the fourth thing was to provide enough board autonomy so that the board can execute its independent judgment that's consistent with the corporation's code. Because remember, the board is the entity that ultimately has to run the corporation. So those are some of the reasons why the staff drafted the bylaws as they were and with the direction based on what we got from you at the last meeting. And those items are all open for discussion tonight. We're happy to hear that discussion, to answer any questions that we can. We have Mary Ellen and Britt here to help us out with that, take some input from the public, and then have you give us some additional direction so we can go back to work and craft the bylaws that I think the city council and the community are comfortable with. So that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
I have a question. So let's just say that the council tonight says we want 11 members, up to 11 members, and 2 members from the city council on the board. When those city council members step away from the city council and become board members, do they have any additional input, any additional powers, any additional over and above any other board member, or are they just a board member that just happens to be on the city council?
That's a good question. No, under the corporation's code, they are board members and owe a particular duty of loyalty to the board and would be required, have a fiduciary duty to make decisions that are in the best interest of the corporation.
So they wouldn't necessarily be board members that would come back and report to the council as a whole. They'd be board members to actually work on the not-for-profit corporation. In other words, they would just happen to be members of the city council. So whether you wanted 2, 3, 4, or 5, they would still only be board members. They wouldn't have any additional influence, any additional voting powers, or anything different than any other board member.
Right, they would have the same vote as any other board member. It's somewhat different, for example, than a structure you're familiar with, which is the subcommittee structure, where you were to have 2 members, let's say, of the city council form a subcommittee, go out and get some information, and then bring it back to the city council. That's not the structure that's proposed. What's proposed here is simply that there would be 2 or more or fewer members of the city council on the board that would exercise the same powers and duties as any other board member.
Okay. Well, any questions of Mark or staff at this time? Who would like to start? Rico?
I was going to Mr. Mayor, make a suggestion. I'd like to hear from the public. They certainly got to hear from us last time, and I'd like to hear their feedback before I ask my questions.
Okay. Is that all right with everybody else? All right. Line up. Okay. Just tell us your name and your street.
Carolyn Gray, and hoping to come back to Fairmont Drive. Okay. On or about January 23rd, when you had your first meeting, one of the questions that came up, one of the members of our community said, the San Bruno Community Foundation doesn't mention anything about where the funds came from. And the reason that the city got the funds, and it was suggested at that time that something be put into writing somewhere that that money came because 38 homes were destroyed, 8 people lost their lives, etc. Not in that way. And at that time, Mr. Ibarra, Councilman Ibarra, said yes, he thought that we could include on all correspondence and information that went out a sentence statement that said that this money for this foundation was a result of the events that happened in September. Put whatever way you wanted to, but that there was mention of why this foundation came about.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name's Doug Coons. I live on Claremont Drive. I have questions regarding the approval of the spending policy. I'm a little unclear as to exactly what that means. Is this could be interpreted to mean that the board becomes nothing more than an advisory committee for the city council rather than a board that's able to act in and on upon itself. So I'm curious exactly how that would work. Would the board itself be able to actually make decisions and spend money, or are they nothing more than an advisory committee?
Okay.
Good evening. I'm John McLaughlin. We live on Claremont. And I wanted to speak to 2 issues. One, the composition of the board and the numbers. Having been on the school board and a member of a 5-person board, I understand, why you're wrestling with the numbers. Because I did the same thing when I started working with nonprofits. And I found out it was very common to have up to 12 people on the board. And I just kept thinking with the school board, we'd never have gotten anything done. But it's a different environment. And one thing I've learned from the boards I've worked with, and I worked with one as I was actually managing the nonprofit, and I worked with another one currently as a consultant. They use the vacant or the positions on the board. They may be authorized 12 by their bylaws. They may only fill 10 or 9. And then if something comes up, like the one I managed wanted to get into a new field of psychoanalytic education, and they wanted to bring a subject matter expert in and involve them in the organization so that they would get the benefit of that. And they used it for that, and they also used it for the treasurer position at one time because they wanted somebody that had financial expertise. The nonprofit I consult with really felt they needed to do more in the marketing area. So they went out and got a board member that had a marketing background that was willing to serve on the board and invest the time and share their advice with them. So you can make use of that, and probably and should. And the other thing you can do, and I'll defer to counsel because he's got to tell you what's legal and right, but you can have ex officio members on the board. Just as with the school board, the superintendent was the clerk of the board, a non-voting member, but an actual member of the board. So you can do that sort of thing. So those are all things I think that you should consider. And it is kind of a leap of faith to go from a 5-person board that makes decisions to a board that is all-inclusive and has a lot of perspectives. But I guess the thing is they work. The other point is in terms of the communications with the board, and I don't know of any legal reason why the council couldn't share the other 3 members of the council, as long as you comply with the Brown Act and you discuss things properly and do all those things, you couldn't share some of your concerns or some of the things that you think you have interest in and rely on your 2 board members to take that back to the board, which I think happens with your subcommittees. You know, Rico and I were talking after the last board meeting, and the one thing I remember on the school board is, and I had the perspective of being on subcommittees and then being the board representative to the subcommittees, is the members of those committees, and it would probably be the same with this board, do look to the council members or the school board members or whoever the designated representatives are to share their insights and provide their insights, and a lot of value is attached to those, and I don't think you should lose sight of that. So that's my comments. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I'm Joanne McLaughlin, Claremont Drive. Just a couple of things. You mentioned that it would be all right if all 5 members of the city council were on the board. I thought there were Brown Act issues. So I'm just curious about that. Also, I remember when you presented this last time, you talked about the reserved powers, that you pretty much wrote all the powers that you possibly could down to be reserved, and so that they could be edited by the process, you know, but you wrote, you know, as many powers as I guess you had access to, you know, ideas for. So I think it's really important that if there are going to be people giving up their time, volunteering on this committee, that they actually feel they can make an impact. Because if they're feeling like they're just there as going through the motions so that the city council can veto or approve whatever they're going to do, then they're not, who would want to be putting their time into that and just getting frustrated? I mean, I think people should feel that they can make an impact. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Maria Barr. I live on Concord Way. And I have a question regarding the board and the city council, whether in fact you said that the board would have the power to make decisions to spend money. Would it be something that they would have to report to the council before an actual agreement is made? And also, if there are volunteers from our community that was impacted by the explosion, will these people be working with the board and also a definite commitment that their input is valid and worthwhile for the people to spend the time and effort in trying to give our sincere input to the community? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Alice Barnes, Fifth Avenue. I submitted 4 pages of comments earlier today. Apologize for the lateness of it. And I understand that before you get your final draft, you will get an opportunity to read those and consider some of my suggestions. But at the city manager's suggestion, I'd like to raise 2 issues. The first one is the fact that you will have between 5 and 11 authorized members. And I see a problem with that further back on page 5, under section 6, the quorum, that says a majority of the authorized number of directors shall constitute a quorum. And my understanding of quorum is half plus 1. Authorized 11, you go 5.5. I guess council will say 6 provides a quorum. But if you appoint only 5, you're not going to be able to do business because you won't have the quorum of 6 that you need. And I'm sure that the powers that be will be able to explain that to me. I envision a situation where you will have just 3 directors there, because that's kind of like a quorum of 5, and we're not going to discuss authorized here. So we now have 3 directors present, and 2 gang up on the 3rd one. I want to call them Rambo directors. And in my comments, I mentioned that several times, that it could cause a whole lot of problems. And if 2 of these 3 directors are raising holy you-know-what, and you folks really don't have that much authority over what these 2 people are doing, even if there are 3 of you, a majority of the council. I think you have to review the quorum, and I think you have to get away from the range 5 to 11. Frankly, I think there are at least 11 or 9 other intelligent people who could join 2 of you on that board. I also would recommend that you start out with varying lengths of term. Otherwise, in the year 2017, we're going to have all new members, or all of them are going to be reappointed, or whatever. I think that when you start out, some should be at 2 years and some should be at 4 years. Likewise, if the 2 council members are appointed, I would suggest that you come from different election years, so that in November of this year, those 2 people don't get knocked off and you got to start all over with 2 new ones. At least, you'd have one from the other 2 years. If that's not clear to you, I can't make it any clearer. But that quorum is a big problem in my book. I did the greens for you folks. So I have a problem with the officers. We shall not have a council on advising this board of directors, because there is none listed here. I trust the 2 council members really a lot. You can handle the legal questions. We don't need counsel, but you know that you're going to want one. The 10 items, I think I have complete trust in this council, and I'm saying that out loud publicly, that you will appoint the right people to serve as directors on this board. You know and I know this ain't peanuts that we're talking about. And so I have complete confidence on your ability to appoint people. I'm not so sure you need 10 reserved powers. For example, if you look at Article 16, reserved powers, item Charlie, subpart Charlie, approval of the corporation's annual budget. Please, by all means, approve it. But what happens if you don't? That maybe somebody could provide an answer to that. What happens if the council does not approve the budget? Then it says approval or amendment of the corporation's grant policies. I think you meant approval, and I'm not getting it tonight. I'm sorry. You want approval by the council of both the original grant policies as they will be written, and you want the council to approve any subsequent amendments thereto. I don't know how to write that in English. and the approval of election of officers of the corporation. I don't think you have any business in that business. You guys work hard enough running the city, etc., setting policy. You don't need to approve who the officers are that your appointed board selects. I trust them also. And with that, I hope that you will take a gander at those other pages. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Michael Kesselman. I live on Poplar Avenue. And first of all, I'd like to say what a wonderful opportunity this is for the city of San Bruno. I've been aware of philanthropic activities, and to have this potential vehicle to do things in our community, I think is wonderful. A couple of comments. One is with the reserved powers that the council holds. In last meeting, it wasn't clear. Somebody asked a specific question. My understanding is with all these powers as they are listed, it does not include the grant-making authority. While the council may approve the annual budget of the board of the foundation, my assumption is the council, other than the two committee members, the two council members that will be on the deciding board, will not have any authority in terms of grant making. Just want to make sure that I understand that correctly and that's clear, because it didn't seem clear at the last meeting. And the other thing which I wanted to mention, which I think is really good, is I noticed in the rewrite of the bylaws here that it was raised the question about whether the foundation was going to be an endowment. In most cases, foundations are set up, and there's a certain percentage of the assets or the interest that's clarified in advance as to what the grant-making amount will be. In this case, it did not seem clear, and it's really good that you caught that, and I'm not sure how you're going to deal with it. It appeared from what I quickly read here as though the council would have the authority every year to determine what the grant-making amount would be. And I just raise that as an issue. It'd be good to clarify that as much as possible. It could be a difficult point to deal with on an annual basis. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael. Anyone else? Okay, let's try to get some answers. First of all, Carolyn talked about the San Bruno funds and a mention and inclusion of what in fact caused all of these funds to be in existence.
Right. Well, it's true that the articles of incorporation that were filed doesn't specify what the source of the funds were. It would be unusual for articles of incorporation to say that. I would note that the settlement agreement, which specifies that the funds must be transferred to a nonprofit, is a public record. It's posted on the website, and I'm not aware of any confusion that exists as to what the purpose of the funds were and why the city has $70 million.
I wouldn't think it would be too difficult to incorporate a very small paragraph as on something, whether it be the foundation's letterhead or something, to just remind people and keep in perpetuity as to how these funds came about. And it doesn't have to be very lengthy, but it should be mindful of what happened and what we're using these funds for going forward. So I think it's a good idea. Okay.
I'll make mine quick.
Rico?
I agree. I'd like to see it on.
I don't recall making a comment, but I think it does totally make sense. I've reviewed other foundations, seen their websites, reviewed annual reports, and every single one of them seems to describe their beginnings, their starts, and their purpose. And so I think we never should forget where this came from. And I think doesn't need to be any elaborate displays or anything, but the respect for what this community went through should be adequately explained. And people will, I think they'll feel differently when they see what the foundation does in the future.
Michael?
On this topic, I'm okay with including that.
Irene, you have any?
Oh, 100%. I
Okay,
think it,
good.
And that one's easy. And I too have seen one sentences on letterheads that say, in memory of, or because of, or, some kind of sentence that's,
Good.
that should be there,
Very
so
good.
people don't forget.
Okay.
That's one of the easier ones, guys.
And then Mr. Coons had some questions regarding approval of funds, advice, and control. And let me just say one thing and interject here. Don't forget, these funds are for the community of San Bruno, and they will be used in the community of San Bruno. So whereas a lot of other nonprofits, not-for-profits can be used in varying ways throughout different communities, with the central location, this is a one-off. This is a very special, unique. I think one time we tried to do some research to see if this had been done before, and we couldn't find anything. So all of these funds will, in fact, be spent at your suggestion in your own community. So that's really important. Don't forget that. Mr. Coons had some questions regarding approval.
So I think his question, and then some of the later ones, which we'll touch on, really address one sort of overarching thing, which is what's the real relationship between the City Council and the Board of Directors? And here's sort of the way we envision it. Right now, the City Council sets overall policy for the city. Once the Board of Directors is appointed, they would set the overall policy for the corporation, for the nonprofit. But the City Council has the authority to review those policy directions and all of those major policy decisions that the board sets to make sure they're consistent with the needs of the community. So when in answering some of these questions, what we'll find is that the reserved powers aren't powers to say, well, this organization gets, $100 and this one gets $1,000. Those are not reserved powers that are contemplated in the agreement. What's reserved is the power to look at the overall policies, yes, on a yearly basis, to determine and make sure that the Board of Directors is fulfilling the goals of the city and the City Council in its overall policies. So they're reviewing the board's policy in much the same way as they're setting policy for the city. So that's the answer to the spending policy. The Board of Directors is not simply an advisory arm of the City Council under this construct. Instead, it's making independent decisions, most of which are not subject to review or approval by the City Council, but the major policy decisions of which would be. I can go through the other questions if you'd like, or if you'd like to read them off, I'd be happy to answer the rest of them for you.
No, Mr. McLaughlin had some questions about varied experience on the board and ex officio members, those types of things.
Right, and so right now the executive director is listed as an ex officio member of the board. It's within your discretion. If you'd like to have other ex officio members of the board, there's no legal reason why you couldn't do that. I think he also, one of either Mr. or Mrs. McLaughlin, sorry, I can't remember, had a question about whether members, let's say there were 2 on the board, could the other 3 members of the City Council share their opinions with those 2 board members? The answer is yes, but in a public meeting. And so that's one of the things that would have to be followed.
Would that also pertain to members of the board if there were 11 members on this board and somebody's shopping at Lunardi's or Molly Stone's and they say, hey, I know you're a member of the board, I got to talk to you about something.
So that's the same.
Member of the public.
Right. So there's no prohibition on conversations or constituents or members of the public talking to board members. When you get more than a majority of board members in one place at the same time, that's a quorum, and we'll get to Ms. Barnes's issue in just a second. But that's a quorum and therefore a meeting and therefore would have to be agendized. So if you suddenly ran into 6 members of an 11-member board of directors at Lunardi's, the best
You send 2 more down to Molly Stone's.
You send, that's right. The rest of them go to Molly Stone's. So, right. So that's the answer to the Brown Act question. And there was some confusion. I apologize if I created it, that more than 2 members of the City Council would create a Brown Act question for the board. It's not that it's prohibited, it's that it just raises some additional complications. And what we heard from our advisors was those are complications that are most easily avoided by not having a quorum of the City Council on the board. But it is within your discretion to decide if you do want to have a quorum or all of the board members be city council members, and then we'll have to figure out how to make that work for you.
Okay, and then, did you just answer the Brown Act question for Joanne?
I hope so.
Okay, all right, okay. And then, let me see, Maria Barr had a question regarding, control, San Bruno only, that kind of thing. I think I said something about that a little while ago about the control rests with the board and it stays within the city of San Bruno. It doesn't go anywhere else. So.
Right, and I think one individual, maybe it was Mrs. McLaughlin, indicated the board members need to feel as if they want to have an impact, and that's absolutely right. Of course, we understand that, and we think that the structure that's proposed, and in fact, really any structure you would propose, would allow for that, because those board members are going to be making myriad individual decisions on a daily, monthly, and yearly basis that are going to directly affect the programs and facilities and activities that they're funding.
Okay. Let me see. Alice had some questions. You probably wrote most of them down regarding length of term and
yes,
officers, legal counsel, quorum, reserve powers.
Right. Yeah. No, those were good. There was an earlier question about the use of volunteers who were affected by the explosion. I wanted to be sure we address that. The bylaws do allow the board to appoint advisory committees of really any kind. I think there was discussion at one of the very early meetings that was an interest of the city council to make sure that there was a broad perspective on multiple advisory committees about all kinds of different issues from the community. That's certainly not prohibited by the bylaws, and something that I think the board staff would be encouraging the board to do. On Ms. Barnes's comments, yes, thank you for those 4 pages. I got through a page and a half of them. There are some very good comments in there, so we'll be sure to review all of them. I think you caught some little inartful drafting, if I want to put it that way. Just to respond to a couple of things on the quorum, which is one of your main issues. We interpreted perhaps not a very clear statement of what a quorum is, simply by saying that when the city council decides to appoint X number of members, that's the authorized number. And so therefore a majority of that number constitutes a quorum. If it's unclear, we'll check with Britt, and maybe we can revise that to make sure it's clear that you don't have a quorum that exceeds the number of board members. So that's, we'll want to make sure to take a look at that. I think Ms. Barnes had some good points about a staggered 2- and 4-year terms. I did put that in my comments. It wasn't in the bylaws because the city council is the appointing authority, so you could appoint how many ever council members you want to the board to initial 2-year and 4-year terms. Interesting suggestion about not having those people be in the same election year. So that was interesting. And then finally, she talked a little bit about the reserved powers. What if the city council doesn't approve the budget? And the answer to that would be it would go back to the board for further review. What we heard from Mary Ellen on that topic is, in general, what happens is before the board submits a budget to the city council, they'd want to make sure it's reviewed by staff and make sure it includes all the things that the city council is interested in having. And so obviously it wouldn't really serve either side's interest to have a ping pong ball back and forth saying, well, no, I don't like this budget, and then they say, well, here, let's do something else. So it's hoped that the staff of the agencies would be able to work together to resolve those issues. With respect to approval of officers, again, a policy decision if you want to approve or not those things. And then finally, I think there was a endowment issue on the endowment. It's not proposed in the bylaws that there be a defined endowment for the reasons stated in the comments, that it restricts both the city council and the board, but that indeed the decision on spending, not on individual programs, but on broad policy goals and objectives, would come back to the city council on a yearly basis.
Okay, I think Michael had a question on grant-making authority also.
Yes, and again, that would be a policy issue that goes to the board, not individual grants for this or that. And Mary Ellen can explain that in general, what happens is there's a grant-making committee of the board of directors that would actually enter into an RFP process, would send out applications to individuals who were seeking grants. Those would be vetted by a committee of the board. Decisions would be made, they would be scored, and then the board itself would approve those decisions.
Okay. You want to comment on that, Mary Ellen?
Perfectly said.
Sorry, I said I would let Mary Ellen speak, but obviously, being a lawyer, I
Doing a
haven't
great
done
job.
that yet. Yes, thank you.
Carried away. Were most of your questions, all of your questions answered to your satisfaction? Michael? Speak into the mic, Mike. We're recording.
Sorry, just to clarify further, in terms of $70 million is a lot of money, but depending upon how much the annual grant making will be, it's going to have a huge impact on what the foundation can accomplish and how much leverage it may have in the community. So I'm just curious if you can say any more about, is that an annual decision that will be based on A, B, and C? Will it change every year? Things like that. Thank you.
Right, that's an excellent question. We don't have any restrictions or guidelines in the bylaws on that, and typically, I think we would hear from Mary Ellen that that's a decision for the board.
Okay. All right. Alice?
Could you clarify, please, on the portion about the directors have to be a resident of San Bruno or et cetera, but then you added a statement, and I'm afraid to paraphrase it, that the money will be for San Brunans, but you're not excluding expenditures of these funds outside of San Bruno, which benefit San Brunans, right? In other words...
For instance?
For instance, if we would like to get a piece of fire apparatus for the fire department, and it's a great idea to have this coffee truck for the fire department, but you can't buy one except in South San Francisco. We would still be able to spend these San Bruno dollars out there for the benefit.
Well, first of all, the agreement, the restitution agreement specifically prohibits us from using the funds for any type of general fund purpose at all. So it can't go to any salaries. It can't go to anything like that. Fire, police, salaries, those types of things. They have to be run themselves the way they're being run now. So I think it's pretty obvious that if we wanted to do a 5,000 foot addition to the senior center, would want to get the best price. In my mind, I'm just speaking for myself now, I necessarily wouldn't want to restrict it to a San Bruno contractor. It would benefit the whole San Bruno community to have that built. So those are things that we have to work through.
So it could be spent outside of the community.
Well,
to
benefit the community, sure. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Any comment on that, Mark?
No, I think that's right. The bylaws don't require all of the dollars to be physically spent in the city of San Bruno. They simply require that the funds be used to benefit the San Bruno community, and that can be done in a number of different ways. You could certainly have an organization based in Millbrae that one of its purposes might be to benefit individuals in San Bruno, for example. There's no prohibition in the bylaws that says that that the board couldn't make a contribution to that organization.
I think the overall intent, the overall goal was the input of the community of San Bruno would ultimately be the people that would suggest to this board what they want the money spent for, right?
You mentioned that they're prohibited from spending money in terms of employee salary and so forth. Now, suppose the board wanted to contract with the city to provide secretarial services or some such thing. Would that be a prohibited act, or would that be possible? Rather than, as opposed to hiring their own staff or whatever, which probably wouldn't make a lot of sense. You just contract with maybe the city or some other organization. Is that
good question.
Allowable activity?
Good question.
Yes, of course. The intent of the settlement agreement was that the city should not spend the funds on salaries to conduct its operations, not operations of the nonprofit by contract. So the nonprofit certainly has the ability to either hire its own staff, to hire consultants, or to contract with the city to use a portion of city staff to perform some of its services at a cost to the nonprofit.
Okay.
I have a question.
Speak
your
right
form-
into the mic.
Oh,
Thank you. We're
my name
recording
is
this.
Noelle Ruane. I'm related to him by marriage. Anyway.
All right. Do I have to recuse myself or something, Mark? Or- Go ahead.
Nonprofit, I am not that familiar with the scope of this nonprofit. However, if you have a nonprofit, $7 million is a spit in the ocean these days, okay? It's good money, but we need to make it go further than it is. And I'm saying, can we create matching grants because we're a nonprofit? Can we apply for matching grants from federal and state to make the money go further? So we can take care of, I can think of 4 buildings in San Bruno that need major surgery. Recreation center, swimming pool, library, fire station on El Camino. Okay? I moved here in '55. There were 14,000 people here. There are now over 40,000. Started out with Fords and Chevys, ended up with BMWs and Mercedes. We're growing. We're getting a whole different mindset in San Bruno, younger people. But notice here tonight, you've got all the gray heads.
Thank you. Mark?
Well, I'll let Mary Ellen, take the first part of that question.
You
with
finally
respect to
finally get to say something.
grants.
Go ahead.
Well, she's been waiting for that chance.
I know she has.
For me to give it to her.
There's no prohibition from San Bruno Community Foundation applying for grants from other funders or from the government. However, there will be some prerequisite items that the city, that the San Bruno Community Foundation will have to complete. For example, its first 990, its IRS filing, and its first audit, as those are mostly required to apply for those sorts of grants.
Okay.
And to just further follow up on that, I think at one of the very first meetings you had, we asked a question: do you want to authorize or prohibit the foundation from doing its own fundraising? And the answer was you didn't want to prohibit that activity. So that's certainly an activity that you can perform. And then finally, there's another and maybe other opportunities to maximize or leverage the funds available by, if the funds are desired to be used for construction of community facilities, let's say, the city can leverage that by bonding against the income stream. So there may be other opportunities to leverage those funds that the board would explore in making its decisions.
Okay. Anyone else?
Marilyn Psychotis from Concord Way. And I was just a little curious. At the beginning, when we first started with this project, it was described as a not-for-profit as opposed to a non-profit, and there were some differences, particularly where it related to the real estate, what the city owned with the lots that were vacant and what was owned by the PG&E. What has happened with that if it's now a non-profit? I don't understand, have we moved from not-for-profit to non-profit? Because it seemed like all of the bylaws were a little bit different from that.
Okay, we'll get an answer for you.
Right. There's actually no legal distinction between a nonprofit and a not-for-profit. And the lots and the disposition of the real estate and so on has nothing to do with that designation. It's totally unrelated to the name that was given nonprofit, not-for-profit. Those are used interchangeably.
Oh, that's not what we were informed in the beginning.
No.
We were told it was totally different.
Okay, so there's no difference there, but
clarify.
yeah, okay.
For me, I don't know if everybody else.
All right, so if there's really no difference. That's number one. Number two, maybe you could explain briefly about the lots. We went through that long process with PG&E, the city owning a certain amount of lots, and PG&E owns some other lots, and what happens with the lots that were included in the $70 million, which is really $68,750,000?
Sure. So part of the settlement was the transfer of 5 lots in the Crestmore neighborhood, and those lots had previously been purchased by PG&E from their original owners. Those lots have been transferred to the city, and the current status is a city council decision to proceed with soliciting development interest for the joint development of those lots, or the 3 of those lots that the city anticipates having no beneficial public use in the future, along with 7 lots that are currently and still owned by PG&E, or rather I think it's 6 lots with 1 pending in escrow, for a total of 10 lots that we are currently soliciting developer interest, and will be evaluating responses to an RFP and bringing back to the City Council the opportunity to consider award of the establishment of a development agreement by which a private developer would take ownership of the lots and would develop them according to the city's standards. So that is currently the case. It is anticipated, as I indicated, that the lots, or at least 3 of the lots that are currently owned by the city, would be transferred on a for sale basis to a developer, along with the lots that are currently owned by PG&E. And so the value there'll be a future decision to replace the amount of the value of the settlement that was taken in lots could be returned to the value of the fund once those lots have been sold to a developer.
Answer your question. Okay.
Are any of the lots still owned by PG&E? Or are they all?
But lots within the neighborhood, there are currently 6 lots. The last information I have, there are currently 6 lots owned by PG&E in the neighborhood. They are unrelated to the settlement. They were purchased additionally by PG&E after the settlement was entered. And there's 1 in escrow. So we believe that there will be a total of 7 that ultimately the city, in a agreement relationship with PG&E, will take responsibility for seeing to it that those are developed.
Okay. Anyone else? Maria?
I wanted to ask about those lots, whether they're owned by PG&E or the city of San Bruno. Are they considering the fact that all these new houses that are almost finished, people are moving in, but then there's a vacant spot in the middle of all these brand new houses? And we have had a lot of dirt and construction and noise and everything. And is there any consideration given to trying to get these things done in a way where maybe the whole construction can be done in the community at a reasonable time, instead of having to wait another 2 or 3 years for them to decide even to sell or to do something constructive with the properties?
Maria, part of the reason we decided to go with and combine with PG&E with an RFP, a request for proposal, was in fact to get them all done at the same time. So we wouldn't have 5 people saying, I want to do them right now, and 2 more saying, I'm just going to wait a while, and then the neighborhood is dealing with construction ongoing for many years. So that was the whole reason that we really wanted to get it done all at the same time with 1 RFP. So when it's culminated, it will be done at the same time.
That makes a lot of sense. Mm-hmm. I have another comment. Glenview and San Bruno Avenue, the lot that had a lot of weeds, real tall weeds, and was very unsightly.
Well, let me, I don't want to cut you off, but I want to concentrate on the nonprofit this evening,
Oh.
not-for-profit. So we can get that addressed, and we'll get an answer for you on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anyone? Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, let's open it up for council discussion, and since you wanted the public to go first, you get to go first.
I'd like to see Ken, who I haven't heard from in a while.
I think Ken wants our input.
Mr. Rivera.
I guess you're wrong.
We missed you.
You all remember Ken. He's been away.
I'm the new guy, yeah. No, but I've been in 2 centuries, though. Anyway, I just want to say that my biggest concern here, and I can really appreciate the gray hairs here, you are the experience in this community, and I really respect hearing from you. Unfortunately, not only are you experienced, but you also are victims. And I know how serious and this is, the progress in this. I am very uncomfortable until I see the makeup of this board and to see what direction this board, that when everything gets put on the, or mostly everything gets put on the table. Like your relative said,
By marriage.
like Mrs. Romaine said, it's $70 million doesn't mean much. It means a lot, but I think initially the attitude in the community was, I want this million, everything. And before you know it, once everyone grabs their million, there's pocket change on the table. I really see it as our new redevelopment. I see it as our nest egg that we will save some, use some, and also invest, and use it quite possibly as debt service. That's how we use redevelopment. That's how we've, improved this community this last 20 years. Now we don't have it, and it's almost like it was a godsend to have now $70 million infusion. Whether I'm on this board or not, whether I get knocked out this November or not, I will be an active participant at these meetings, because I think it's not only important that the $70 million gets used wisely, but I obviously want to see those 4 buildings that were built when you moved here, and we're still with those same 4 buildings. We have to do something with, with this community and with those facilities. Plus, there's other things that, that we may not have any idea of what they are right now. We should be able to use this money, leverage this money, for generations. And so I would just like to, I feel a lot more comfortable when I see experienced people, whether they're gray hairs or not, sitting on this board and making very, very prudent, intelligent, long-range suggestions as to what this foundation does. Then I'll feel very comfortable, giving, those powers or limiting those powers of the council. Because I mean, it's like the lady said, it's the whole list, and I'm sure we can, pare it down. But as of now, I'm feeling better now, because I'm hearing the potential suitors of this money, and I think it's starting to get exciting.
Okay. Specifically, Ken, you weren't here at the last meeting. We talked about and had, I think, a discussion, maybe a consensus, maybe not, of the amount of the number of directors. Are you in agreement that it should be from 5, no less than 5 and no more than 11?
I don't think it should be 5. I think forget about 5. I think we should. I think eventually we can get to 7. I don't think. I think at this early stage, with people coming from so many directions and so many requests, you may need 11 11 people to, to weed through or this stuff and this information and get organized. Whether we get 9, people that really want to serve and want to be committed is another question. Yeah, so I'd say more like 7 to 11.
Okay. Anybody else on the number of directors? Rico?
That was my suggestion last time. It sounded better coming from Ken, I guess. But I had said 7 to 11 because I was trying to equate if council members were appointed, and I was the one who said I want to see the bigger picture. I still want to go back to that, but to answer your question, I had said 7 to 11. I went along with the consensus of 5 to 11 to move on, but anyway, that was just a thought.
Irene?
Big questions. The more we delve into these issues, the more difficult it seems because every piece of it makes a difference. A small decision makes a difference in the bigger picture. A bigger picture decision makes, you have to coordinate it all. And the more you delve into it, the more complicated it gets. For me anyway, I originally felt that 5 was plenty, or the smallest number. I'm tending to rethink it and would like to revisit 7 to 11. I'd also like to revisit how many council people are on. I keep going back to and not feeling comfortable with only 2 council people. I really, really wish we would look at the whole council. The whole council was the redevelopment agency. It worked fine. The whole council could be on this board with additional people. I think part of it is it's going to be in my eyes, it would be extremely difficult to have board members appointed by the city council and there not be any direct accountability to the residents of San Bruno. As council people, we have direct accountability to you. If you don't like what we're doing, you tell us loud and clear when you vote for us or don't vote for us. If this board is made up only of appointed people or only 2 council people and the majority of them are appointed people, I just think it doesn't work. I just have a really hard time looking at how that would be. There are certainly people out there who would do a good job, have experience with nonprofits, all those things. But this, as you said at the very beginning, is not a normal, regular nonprofit. This is a totally unique animal, and I just really want to get that out and make it part of our discussion.
Okay. Michael, the number of directors?
What we have in the bylaws gives us some flexibility. The way it sits right now, 5 to 11 gives us a bare minimum number and a maximum. There's nothing that could say that the policy we establish immediately on day one is that there will be 7. That's our decision to make, and it falls within the range of 5 to 11. 10 years from now, this is still going. Maybe it's gotten to a point where it runs like a well-oiled machine and 5 people can efficiently do it. I guess that ties directly back to Irene's comments about council member participation. I see something completely opposite, and I think I'm definitely in the minority here in saying that I see this as being something that's run by the people, not by the government. My vision of this when it was first proposed was that this is something that's going to go back to the people that were damaged by the incident. And the city took the lead in rallying the resources and fighting the battle and getting it done. But I would really like to see this be something that's a lot more independent, not something that's our vision, but something that's, we have so much influence in just in appointing the directors that sit on it. That is going to really color what that committee is going to be doing. And for us to insist on having council members sit on that board of directors, it adds another bias, I feel, to the decisions of that board. And also all the veto powers. It's, again, it waters down the purity of the influence of the community. That's my opinion. I think it needs to be more independent, not less independent. I also question what the role of those council people would be. Would those council people be there, in fact, to represent the interests of the majority of the city council, or would they be there as independent citizens and members of the community? What are they bound to do as council members sitting on the board? And I don't know if you can make that distinction.
I'd like to address that. I would like to think that this council individually and collectively represents the interests and the well-being of the whole community. I think that's our job. So you're right, you can't separate it, because it's in essence a mirror of the same job. We are entrusted, the city was entrusted to create a nonprofit, to use the funds to benefit all of the city, all the residents of the city. And that's going to be a tough job, because there are people who feel that the people who were damaged the most should have the most say in how that's done, or the most benefit, or whatever. But my understanding of our task, or the board's task ultimately, is that the benefit goes to the city as a whole, because the city as a whole suffered in different ways and in different degrees, but as a whole. We're not known as San Bruno, the city with the heart. When I go outside of town, then people say, where do you live? And I say San Bruno. They don't say, oh, the city with the heart. They say, oh, the city that blew up. That's part of the totality of this. And even the fact that we want to make sure that this nonprofit reflects where it came from, and that we want to say, remember, don't forget, and keep pushing that, we want pipeline safety and all those things that are connected with it. So to me, the council's responsibility in everyday stuff is for the well-being of the city as a whole. The city as a whole, the voters give us the trust and responsibility to make decisions about, now I'm going to forget, $36 million in operating budget, and another $30-some million in capital improvement budgets. I mean, you guys give us a lot of responsibility for a lot of things with a lot of money every single day. So that's where I'm coming from. Totally opposite, but there we are.
I don't think the people would agree we represent their interests when we raise their rates.
But we are, because we're raising the rates to improve the system so that they have clean water and the sewage doesn't flood up and contaminate their streets. I mean, why else would we raise their rates? We don't raise it for any other reason.
You and I sat up here almost a couple of years ago in this very room, and we were here to tell people that we had money that we were holding. Mm-hmm. And I remember somebody made the comment, maybe a couple of people made the comment, we're adults, we know what to do with our money. Don't tell us that you're holding it for our best interest, or that you're trying to make decisions on how that money should be used. I mean, I still remember those words, and yes. I still feel that the people need to have a major part of the say in what happens with this. And I think they're going to make the right decisions, and I don't think they need us to make that for them.
But you're looking at two different pots of money.
Yeah, exactly.
One pot of money was directly for the victims who they were direct victims.
And I don't mean to confuse where the money came from, but I mean that money was given to the city for the benefit of the people, and we had to make that decision because the money came to us. In this case, it's similar in that the money came to the city, but in this case, the city, I mean, we're basically told, as the government, you're not really handling it. That you have to set up a nonprofit organization that's going to handle this. And to me, that means arm's length. It means not an extension of the city council. It means a separate entity.
I'm going to try again.
Okay.
I'd like to address this as well. Just for the record, look around and see how many people are here tonight. So even though you feel that the council is doing a marvelous job, not everybody in the neighborhood does. I talk to people, are you going tonight? What for? Because I'm going to say, I'm going to make my suggestions and other people are, and then they're going to go ahead and do as they darn please anyway. So I'm coming from a different place. I listen to my neighbors. I'm not sitting on the council. People are leaving this neighborhood for some of the decisions made about education. A lot of them bought homes here. The young people, we're losing some of our young people. Some of them I know personally because we've had so much of a change in the population, all of us gray hairs, that there are no children in the neighborhood for them to play with. There are no children to fill the schools that are being closed, and therefore they're going to move where there are children. So there are other things to think about besides the money that's going here. This is a vision of San Bruno, presumably, a future vision, correct? Okay, if we're going to have a future, we have a lot of things to think about. And one of them is that I personally know people leaving this neighborhood with their children. Some of them are some of the emotional impact. You know, and unless you live where we live and went through what we went through, you have no idea what the emotional impact has been on the people who live there. And it's still going on. It's 3 years now. It's still going on. So there's a lot of things to look at besides the bucket of money. So you need to look at a more broad idea of what is good for San Bruno. That's all I'm saying. I know how people feel there, and some of them are not feeling very good, and they're leaving. So what kind of a future do you want for San Bruno? We love it here. Gray hairs will stay. But you're going to lose your young people unless you give some serious thought as to how that money is going to be used.
Let me say a few things. First of all, with a question to Mark. For instance, suppose that we had a board of 11 people, and let's suppose we had 2 council members on that board, and let's suppose that we wanted to build a facility a block away from a council member's home. Does that council member have to recuse himself from the board of directors?
What legal counsel's determined is that the members of the board of directors would be subject to the same conflict of interest laws as would apply to you as council members. So the answer is yes.
Okay, so having said that, it could be a difficult situation as it is with what used to be our redevelopment board and things where people had to recuse themselves because of proximity of location and influence in certain areas.
That could occur for the council member participants on the board as well as the other non-council member participants. That's right.
Okay, all right. All right, so you said non-council member participants.
They'd be subject to the same rules.
Through the chair, one additional question on the same point. Would the allocation of funds to do a project like that be a conflict of interest versus deciding on zoning or some other topic related to that construction? Is it really just the allocation of funds still considered a conflict?
So one of the things that the board of directors has the authority to do and would be required to do under state law is adopt its own conflict of interest policy. So it could define more specifically in its conflict of interest policy what precise things constitute a conflict of interest within the zone of those things that are already allowed and prohibited by state law. So I apologize, that's not a direct answer to your question, but each of those conflict of interest issues would have to be looked at individually as they are now for council members, but through the lens of a new and different conflict of interest policy that's yet to be adopted by the board of directors. So, for example, the board could say it's okay for a council member to participate in a decision in which an organization that he or she is a member gets a donation as long as they don't have any direct financial interest in it. That would be a reasonable conflict of interest policy to have. Wouldn't be required to have it, but you could have it. And similar rules could be made for others. But things like the 500-foot rule, for example, I don't think the board could override in a conflict of interest policy.
Okay. Addressing what Michael said and what Irene said, which are two totally opposite ideas. My concern in the very beginning when we had our first meeting at City Hall was that, in fact, believe it or not, I believe there are people that would run for this council if they knew that the council ended up controlling $70 million because they could, a big part of their job would be to control $70 million. So having listened to staff, saying it's probably not a bad idea to have a couple of council members on board, I think Michael has a real good idea. And I think we have enough wherewithal, believe it or not, to appoint some very, very decent, very respectable, very intelligent and knowledgeable people, some experts in finance, some experts in land, some experts in grants, whatever it happens to be. And you have this reserve power here as a council locked into these bylaws, if they're approved that way, to take care of any big issues that may come up regarding one or two or three or a particular board member's decision on anything that involves this community. So I think you really cover yourself. The ideal board for me would be someone high level, whatever that happens to be, influential maybe in the county, to actually interview applicants for this board. And so you set the parameters, and I'll give you my best shot at who I think should be on this board out of all of these applicants. The council approves that board, and then the board goes to work. I mean, it's not up to me as a council member or mayor to say, in the back door, I want you to do this, this, and this, and I don't want this, this, and this. I don't want to get involved in that. I want it to be totally independent for the benefit of the citizens of San Bruno. I don't want to, not that we would, if we were on the board, micromanage. We're definitely going to have enough influence because we as local citizens are going to be able to have the same influence and ideas that you will, and you will come forward with to the board for construction or grants or scholarships, whatever you'd like to do. So I think the board should be totally independent, and I think we are capable enough of appointing, and I'm sure we'll get some pretty good applicants to run this board. And I think we should do that, and we should get on with it as soon as possible. So as far as council members on the board, if the council insists on a couple, that's fine with me, but I have no problem in an independent board that will in fact be influenced by everybody in the city as well as the city council. So, Rico?
Well, I won't reiterate all my comments from the last meeting, which you'll be happy to know. But, I had brought up, Ms. Barnes brought up, why would this body need to do the approval of the elections of officers? As an example, but like you said, that can be, the powers can be revised. I still go back to the same concern I have, and Irene alluded to a lot of it that I had last time, is that the money was entrusted to the city as a custodian to get the nonprofit board in place. I believe that there is a responsibility that is set to this council and to the elected persons. November will bring an election. There could be new people up here. But I think it's the folks that sit up here that have a responsibility to the residents that know the history, know the situation, and assist in its guidance. I don't think anybody backdoors. I think everything is pretty out in the open. I think we have, it's not a slam dunk every time we meet. There are 3-2 votes, there are 4-1 votes. So I think everyone's very independent. It is just, again, it's a unique situation that nobody's traveled, and I believe important as it is that there should be the city council. My suggestion was, of course, and we have the spectrum that shows you our differences of nobody, 5 on the board, 0 to 2 on the board. I thought the board should make all the recommendations and then they get approved as every other committee, commission, and board does in the city for any expenditure of monies of the city, because we are the custodian of those monies. That was my suggestion, but I still believe that in some way the city council has a responsibility and a duty to ensure that those monies go for what the agreement was and what the community expects.
Well, let me ask, we still have that control though, whether there's a board, council member on the board or not. Am I right?
I'm sorry, say that, I didn't hear that last part.
We still have that control. Rico said we were entrusted with doing what the agreement said and doing, building, granting, whatever, what what the board would like to do, but we still have control over that, whether we're on the board or not. Is that correct?
Right. Those major decisions, we tried to draft the reserve powers as broadly as possible so that the city council would have the authority to approve any of those kinds of major decisions that the board made. There's just one thing I do need to clarify, which is that under the Corporations Code, the board of directors cannot be merely an advisory body to the city council.
So it's not like a commission, board, or committee?
That's right. It must independently make its own decisions, only to the extent that certain decisions can be reserved to the city council. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware of that, because that's a really critical point, regardless of how many council members, if any, are on the board.
Okay, so then that takes care of that. It's either the 0 to 2 or the 5, because in my perspective, that's not the way it's devised.
Oh, say that again.
With what Mark just said. So what my theory was, that's not permissible. So it would either be 0 or up to 5 is the only choices that there would be as far as the makeup of the board. And the board,
the council member makeup
yes,
of the board.
council member participation on the board. And it could only be that, and the board would make the final decision, is what I just heard from you. Is that correct?
Right. The board of directors, regardless of how many council members are on the board of directors must be able to make final decisions about running the corporation.
Okay.
Some of those decisions can be reviewed by the city council and approved by the city council. Those are your reserved powers if you're wearing your city council hat as opposed to your board member hat. So when you're wearing your board member hat, you're making decisions that are best for the corporation. When you're wearing your city council member hat, you're making decisions that are best for the city. And those are two separate roles, and there are two different duties that council members would have, being on the board versus being on the city council.
So if the board came to this, decided that they wanted to do a major expansion of the senior center, and they say, this is what we'd like to do, it's going to cost X number of dollars, we want to either fund it, we want to bond it, we want to pay for it, whatever we want to do, would that, the decision part of the city council would say, we have to make sure that this is going through the proper planning process and all of that kind of thing. Could we say, no, you can't do that? We would have to have a solid reason as to why we would object to that or why we would want to approve that?
Well, procedurally, what would happen is the board of directors, if they wanted to do that, would make that proposal in its yearly budget and its yearly spending plan. That would come to the city council for its approval, and you could say, yes, that's a great idea, or yes, but certain things have to happen, or no, we're not interested in doing that at this time. Those are reserved powers right now as the agreement, as the bylaws are currently drafted.
I can tell you what's really going to happen is that whether we're sitting on the board or not, I'm going to be sitting in that audience and I'll be putting my 2 cents in. I mean, there's going to be lobbying. There's going to be a clear, distinct, clear idea of what the community is going to want and who's going to be against it and what's going to be lukewarm, whatever. So I think once we get going on this, that we're going to see what direction it's going to go, and then it's going to be the expertise of consultants and board members and saying, how are we going to use this money to accomplish that? I came in here thinking that I couldn't trust anybody to do what we're doing. And after hearing certain people talk and then also looking at a scenario of, if I have 2 council members on the board, and maybe a 3rd council member wants to be on the board, how's that decision going to come about? And all of a sudden there's a conflict? Because maybe 3 people really want to be on the board, and we have to appoint 2. I'm leaning towards not having any council members on this board, and clearly and succinctly feeling comfortable with reserve powers, because as long as as long as we're clear on what we're covering, every single scenario that can possibly come up, and who thinks better what sort of scenarios would come about, is the 5 of us, then I think we're safe. I understand the Vice Mayor's concerns. I mean, we've worked together for nearly 20 years, so I know what your concerns are. But I can really appreciate what Michael has said. And I think regardless of, yes, the victims, but, you know, we do need, I think, you know, because people suffered, we gathered all this money, we need to let the community, let the community decide on what to do with it, and the board.
Okay, so Mark, are you looking for a consensus tonight, a vote, or I'd like to get, that seems to be the real big part of this. Number one, should council members be on the board, and number two, how many, if they should be. So, go ahead.
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, there does appear to be a difference of opinion. Well, I mean, I will just say, yes, it would be great to get a sense of the majority, at least, if not a consensus. You know, I think we've heard some very passionate and well thought out positions on all sides of this particular issue. And I go back to one of the things I said at the very beginning, which is there's no right answer, and something like this hasn't really been done before. So we shouldn't feel badly that there's a discussion about what should be done. I think these are very difficult issues. I think the difficulty is, on the one hand, you have a situation where you have perhaps no council members on the board, and therefore the only influence they could have is either perhaps as an ex officio member, which we could put in if you wanted, or as members of the public, and through reserved powers, which is sort of after the fact. On the other hand, you have all the council members on the board. That has certain advantages, as a couple of council members have eloquently expressed. Also some issues, because then what you're doing is setting up a situation where when somebody runs for city council, they're also running to have a seat on a $70 million foundation that they're required to serve on. So there's things to think about on both sides of that issue. And the reason why the bylaws were, in essence, drafted the way they were was it seemed like a middle position that most of the council members could agree to, although recognizing that Council Member Ibarra wasn't here and Council Member O'Connell had some additional concerns that she's expressed tonight. So that's why we sort of landed on 2. But again, that's within the discretion of the city council.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, let's do this. Speaking for myself, I would like to see the board makeup of 5, no less than 5, no more than 11, with no representation from city council.
I concur.
I can live with that.
Rico?
No.
No.
Okay. So I think you have your direction there. And specifically, did you need a consensus on the reserved powers?
It's going to be.
Well, I think.
I mean, I think they cover.
Yeah, I mean, if a majority of the council is interested in not having any city council members on the board, I would suggest that the broad reserved powers that we've included are sufficient. I think between now and the next meeting, we'll have an opportunity to consult both with Britt and with Mary Ellen to make sure that we haven't missed anything that's really important in there, and if there is, we'll certainly bring it back to you.
Okay, I agree.
Yeah.
Irene, reserved powers?
And any other additional ones?
Let's see. Strictly speaking, I don't see how you can sit here and say you trust everything and yet take all the powers away. I mean, that's kind of what one of the other pieces that I was looking at. If you're not going to have any council people there, and you're going to appoint people, okay, I don't agree, but okay, then you're saying, however, we want to reserve all the powers. We want a say in the money it's spent, how it's spent, how many people are on it, who's elected, who the officers are. I mean, it's like, why bother? Because you're asking, you're reserving all these powers.
But what powers do you have by having 2 council members on the board?
I want 5.
Oh.
So I guess
All right,
in one instance, I'm kind of getting my cake and eating it too, or I'm getting the frosting, I guess. I'll
What are you
keep the
complaining
powers. Well, I'll say keep the powers and any other ones you want to think about.
Well, you're going to, based on the fact that there would be no council members on this board, you're going to review these reserve powers again to make sure that they're fine-tuned.
Absolutely correct.
The way I interpret these reserve powers, these are policy decisions, not necessarily operational decisions.
Right.
And
That is
that's
correct.
the capacity that we normally operate in. We don't make hiring and firing decisions. The city manager does. We approve general policies, we approve the budget for the city, and that's the role that we're comfortable in doing. And so I don't see this being much different than that.
But we are hiring. That is different.
Or you're appointing.
I just see the worst. I mean, if we don't have these reserve powers, it is conceivable that a power play could be made and a decision can be made out of our control. An appointment can be made and a vote, and before you know it, something that we entrusted on them has gone out of our hands.
So it's safe to say we have consensus on reserve powers with the understanding that staff will look at them a little closer to see if there's anything else we may want to add.
Right, and before we leave that topic, I do want to clarify something that I said earlier, and thank you to the city manager for bringing it to my attention. There was a series of questions about conflicts of interest, and I think I may have misinterpreted one of them and said that the conflict of interest code that applies to city council members, that does not apply to board members who are not city council members. So in other words, if you lived within 500 feet of some project, if you were a city council member and on the board, you'd have to recuse yourself from that decision, but not if you were a board member that's not a city council member. Independently, the board of directors will adopt a conflict of interest code for all of its members. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear in case it was confusing in any way.
Okay. Anything else we're looking for specifically, Mark?
I don't think so.
Through the chair?
Michael?
There was one other section in here that I wanted to offer a suggested change on, where we are limiting membership to residents of the city or businesses that have and I was wondering if the council would consider revising that to say that a majority would be residents or have some sort of business interest in the city, to give us a little bit of flexibility. And if we did want to bring in somebody, say if we wanted to extend an offer to Jerry Hill to sit on this board, that he wouldn't be precluded, or if there were someone with a special interest in what we're doing, that we don't preclude them by this restrictive sort of clause. Maybe Jackie Spear would like to sit on the board, and she wouldn't fall into either of those categories.
Mm-hmm. Rico?
I think I was one who wanted to have it more broad-based last time, and I'm okay with that.
Irene?
I'm very uncomfortable with that. I think we should look at a secondary, like an honorary board or advisory board or some other thing. I think this is San Bruno, should be San Bruno based. It's San Bruno people, it's San Bruno benefits. I mean, Jackie Spear, I love her, and she was really great for us, and she did a lot of things, but I don't see what she could add to a board that one of our residents couldn't, unless she would be, I'm absolutely willing to give advice or input, but I can't see her or anyone like that sitting on the board.
Ken?
I think it makes total sense to have a majority of residents, San Bruno.
You said majority, is that what you said, Michael?
Right.
Majority. And I have no problem with that either. I really don't have a problem bringing, and maybe that person's not even known to us yet, a special individual that has some special expertise in a certain field onto this board if they don't live in San Bruno. Mark?
Well, one alternative the council may wish to consider is specifying that certain individuals, or there be a certain number of individuals that could be ex officio members of the board that don't necessarily need to meet the qualifications of a voting board member. So that's an alternative we could explore. We haven't looked at that structure yet, but in talking with Mary Ellen, that seems fairly common as well. But just something to consider.
Right. And we discussed having subject matter experts in certain areas, and I think that would also give us a broader pool of experts that we might want to bring in, whether as voting or non-voting members. So I just want to make sure we have that option.
Yeah, which we definitely may need. Right. Okay, so you have consensus on that.
So was the consensus or majority that it should be a majority of the board be residents, or that we say all members of the board, but then have ex officio can be anybody?
I think majority of the board should be residents or authorized representatives of a business located in San Bruno, but leave the option open to have board members from outside the community that have a special expertise and would actually be a big asset to the board.
I'm sorry, I disagree, so.
Would you agree if they were non-voting members?
Yes, I think, and we can set up honorary members, we can set up ex officiary members, but I think all the members should be residents of San Bruno or own businesses.
Mike,
Oh, I'm sorry. I think that all members of the board should either be residents of San Bruno or own businesses in San Bruno, or businesses that, major.
Authorized representatives.
Yes.
Okay.
But
I guess the only.
I think all of them.
Yeah, I don't know if I would go at all. I just don't, again, the experts that we may need, and I don't know, again, we need to live with this, we were told last time, for about 3 years before we make any changes. So as we wanted a scope of 5 to 11 or 7 to 11, I think in essence, we can appoint a majority, we can appoint all. It will be up to the council here, but I'd like to have the ability for whomever interviews, even if it's outside, that they are not, okay, well, I only can interview, let's take these off the table right away. I think we should look for where the talent lie and what the needs are, in addition to having San Bruno representation as well.
So I think I'm hearing we'd like to change Section 3B to a majority of members of the Board of Directors be residents of the city of San Bruno. Do you also wish to authorize some number of ex officio members in addition to that, or is that sufficient as stated?
B also states authorized representatives of businesses located in or a substantial interest in the city also, not just residents.
Right.
Right. That would be majority with the rest, could be appointed from wherever.
Right.
Michael?
Right.
Irene?
I already said no.
Okay. Ken?
I agree that they should all be residents or authorized representatives, but I believe there should be a majority that are actually residents. That's my point. I mean, the entire group can be, I mean, if you have, you could be outweighed with a majority of business people.
The way it's written now,
Yeah,
it could.
you could be out, I mean, there could be a majority of representatives that don't live in San Bruno, but have a business or have, what is the wording here? Authorized representatives of a business? What is that? That's very broad. I mean, they may not even be an employee. They might be an authorized representative.
Yeah, but I threw this out the other night, just while. Suppose the CFO of Google, YouTube, wanted to be on the board and said, I think I can offer you some expertise. What do you think? And you go, no, you don't live in the city. Sorry.
No, I'm not saying that he can't. I'm just saying that the makeup of the board should be a majority of residents.
Okay. And that's what I was proposing, that we change it to a
A
majority.
majority of the board
Right,
should be
yeah.
residents, San Bruno residents. The remainder of the board can be representatives or authorized people. The E CEO.
Or anyone from outside the city who has a particular expertise. That's what I believe Michael was asking.
Yeah, I think a majority of the board, I really don't care what the remainder of the makeup of the board is.
They might be that have the most expertise. Okay, I think you have a consensus, at least 4 of us.
Let's get into ethnic breakdown too. You know,
So,
go there.
yeah, so
Okay.
here, I'm going to tell you what I think I heard, and you'll
Okay.
tell me if it's right or wrong. What I've heard is that a majority of the board members should be residents of the city of San Bruno. The remainder may be representatives of a business located in or with a substantial interest in the city, or others who have a particular expertise to offer the board, something along those lines.
Okay,
I'll
that's
accept
fine.
that.
That's fine.
All right. Well, you'll have a chance to look at that language again when it comes back, so.
Anything else, Mark?
Think of anything else? I think that's all we can think of. Thank you very much for your time and direction.
Thank you.
Okay. And thanks for your input tonight.
Thank you for being here on
Yeah,
Friday.
really, it's,
Thank you for spending your Friday night with us.
anybody know the score of the Giants game, or?
Oh, thank you for being here, Ken. Oh, that's right.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Connie will talk to you about that. I know.